Hello everyone, and today we're just going to go through how to actually put together your LittleArm kit. So here's the full kit right here, all the pieces and parts and tools that you'll need. The tools necessary for this are a pair of needle nose pliers, a standard screwdriver, and a really fine tipped Phillips screwdriver. Then you have your power supply, your breadboard, Arduino, mounting screws for the Arduino. Then you have the base of the LittleArm, the shoulder, then the upper arm, and the forearm. Then we get to the gripper. Over there you can see the gripper. There's two toothed fingers, the palm, and then the mounting bolts that go with it, along with nuts. Then you have 4 servos. Each servo has 2 mounting screws and a horn screw that mounts the horn to the servo, and then several screws for mounting the horns to the pieces themselves. Then you have a piece of wire that is for actuating the finger, connecting the servo to one of the fingers, and then various jumper wires, and these vary from one kit to the next, but these are for connecting the servos to the breadboard and to the Arduino. Alright, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to mount the breadboard and Arduino. You see the mounting holes there for the Arduino and the depression for the breadboard. There's several mounting holes around the outside of the arm if you want to stick it to something like a board. And then you can see the mounting holes for the servo in there. We'll get to that. This is where the breadboard goes. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the breadboard. It has 2 screw holes in it, but we don't really use those. They're not necessary. Instead, there's the adhesive on the back. Just peel that off and then stick it down into the depression. You'll see there's these 2 nubs on the side of the breadboard. Make sure they align with the nubs in the depression, otherwise it won't fit at all, and you'll just be fighting something that you won't win. Make sure it goes all the way in, press it down firmly, make sure it's pretty well stuck, and there you go. For the Arduino, it's got 4 holes around the outside of it. Make sure that the USB is facing backwards when you mount it to the base. It should fall right into there and you'll feel pretty snug even without the screws. Then you take your 4 mounting screws. They're the very small tapped screws, pretty short and stubby. And any old screwdriver will work to put these in. There's already holes, the holes tapped there inside of the base. Screw them in. Make sure you don't go too far, otherwise they'll come out the bottom of the base because that's really thin, and then you can end up scratching surfaces with it. Be really careful just to screw them in enough to hold the Arduino there, because there's never going to be any real stress on this unless you're like throwing it around. So there's no reason to put the screws all the way through, unless you mount the whole base to something larger like a board, which is sometimes nice just to give the arm a stronger foundation. The Arduino can also be mounted with just 2 screws. 4 is not really necessary, but it's nice to put them all in there just to be safe, but 2 is really all you need if you get them in there correctly. 2 in opposite corners. Alright, there we go, the base is done. Your Arduino is mounted in there with some screws and the breadboard's stuck in. Ready to move on to the next thing. Now the shoulder and the upper arm. We're going to go ahead and mount horns to these, the servo horns right here, as you can see. Each one of the horns has multiple holes to go through. We'll show you which ones of those to put the screws through. You need about 4 of the small screws. A typical Phillips head screwdriver is too clunky for this, so you want a really fine tipped one to work with these screws. Otherwise you just won't get any purchase. The shoulder has 4 mounting holes along the bottom. You only need to use 2 of them. Grab one of your screws, grab the horn. You can kind of see how it comes together right there. Make sure that the stubby short end of the horn is sticking out so that the servo is able to pull into it. Get it lined up there, kind of see how it goes. Maybe double check to make sure that the horn is lined up with the holes, just to make sure that something didn't go wrong during printing. Get yourself one of these screws and get it started into the horn, and you want the second hole from the outside. That's where those screws go in. That's how it's designed to come together. those are the best ones to mount to. Go ahead and get 2 of those started into the horn. Put them all the way through until their points come out the other side, and that'll help to line them up with the holes in the bottom of the shoulder. And you can see right there how it's the second hole from the outside. Get them lined up with the holes that are printed or in that same general area. The most important thing is just to make sure that the mounting place in the center of the horn is available for the servo and in the center of the shoulder. Go ahead and screw them straight in. It's okay if you kind of move some material around inside the bottom of the arm. It's designed to take that. Just go ahead and go straight on in. Get it lined up with the hole. Again, make sure, double check yourself and make sure it's pretty well centered. Some slop is allowed. You don't have to be super precise with this, but be as close as you can. Get them in there, get them pretty firm. They don't have to be super tight. Otherwise, you can end up stripping out these really small screws. Alright, now we'll take the upper arm here. We'll need 2 horns for this, 1 at each end of the arm. And you can see here the mounting screws. Make sure that the horns go into the side that are kind of like a dish where there's a rim around the outer circle. That's the side you want to mount to. The opposite side is totally smooth. Don't mount any of the horns to that. So go ahead and start a couple new screws there for that. Again, second hole from the outside is the best one to go to. And this is true for all the horns. Get that lined up. Put in the screw, make sure the tips of the screws in the holes and screw it right in the same way as the shoulder. Alright, go ahead and get 2 screws started into the other horn and do the exact same thing on the other side. The horn is mounted to the same side and the holes are again obvious. Alright, so now we have the forearm, and you can see how there's a slot here for the interchangeable grippers. But since we're using a standard gripper here, it has to have a flat side in order to print. So we're going to actually screw it on there with using those 2 mount holes that are on both pieces. But in order to put this gripper together, if you put the pinchers in first, then you can't screw the gripper onto the forearm. So we're going to screw the gripper on the palm of the gripper onto the forearm first, and then we'll put the fingers in. So go ahead and just get your 2 mount screws and get them started into the palm there. Screw those screws in far enough that the tips just kind of come out of the back side, and then you can use them to line up with the forearm. And then screw them in the rest of the way. Get them in there firmly so that nothing has any wiggle, and then you're ready to go. That's where the servo goes. Now we're going to mount the fingers. Make sure that the finger with the tab is on the right side of the arm, on the side of the servo, because they're going to come together and they're going to mesh like that, so that when you move one finger, the other finger moves with it. That's how the gripper works. Get the holes lined up and then grab one of your small screws and press or screw it through, depending on how easily it goes. Sometimes it'll fall right through, other times you gotta help it along some. When you put in the second pincher, make sure that it is a mirror image of the first one. That way you know your gripper will work evenly. If it's not, then one finger will be all the way across and the other one still has a way to go. You want them to pinch in the direct center, so make sure that they are symmetrical. The nuts on the bottom, put them on firmly so that they don't really come off, but not so tight that they squeeze the pinchers. If that happens, then the pinchers won't move very easily and it's just tough on the mechanism. If you're worried about them coming off, maybe put a little bit of hot glue on there, or even some solder if you want something permanent. Alright, there we go. So there is our arm with a gripper, and you can see how the gripper works now. If you move or pull on one finger, then the other one moves with it. Fingers can be a little bit off, but that's just part of the imprecision of 3D printing these smaller parts, but it will work well for whatever you happen to work with. There you go. Now what we're going to do is actually assemble parts of the arm here. And what we're going to do is, first thing we're going to do is we're going to put this shoulder onto the base. And in order to do this, we need to put the servo in. You have 4 of these mini servos. In order to do this, there's a hole, kind of a slot in the back of the base of the arm. You want to thread the servo wires through there. So just get it started and then maybe reach in with pliers or just be gentle threading it through. Get it straightened out and thread it right through, kind of like a thread through needle, at the eye of a needle. Pull it through. And then that servo will fall right into place. You might have to kind of tilt it a little bit to get it started, get past the wires, but then it will pop right in. Alright. Now that servo needs to be screwed into place, and there were those 2 mounting holes before. Now get 2 of the mounting screws, which have kind of the flanges on them, and put them in. Alright, now we've got our servo mounted. In order to put the shoulder on, all you got to do is pop it right into place. And there you go. And you can kind of move it around to see where the limits of your servo are. Now we're going to mount a few of the other servos. With the forearm, the wire for this servo just goes straight through the bottom. There's a slot in the back, but just ignore it. It's just for space. It's a little bit tighter. Again, put it kind of in diagonally and then pop it on through. And then you're set. And then again, 2 mounting screws to put it into place. There you go. Now you have your servo mounted on your arm. This is the servo for the gripper. Now, in order to put the upper arm into the shoulder, first thing you want to do is you want to pop it in so that the servo horn faces the servo side of the shoulder. You can see that by the weird hole on the side of the shoulder. In order to do this, you got to put it in kind of sideways and slide it down. And then just set it aside because we're going to do something with the servos to get them prepared to mount. So, for right at this moment, in order to do that, we're going to want to wire up the Arduino. So with servos, there's 3 wires you want. There's the signal, the positive, and the ground. Signal is the orange or yellow, power is the red one, and ground is the brown or black one. So what we're going to do is we're going to wire up these servos to the Arduino now. To do this, you're going to need your jumper wires, all of them. Blue is in this case, blue is going to be negative, white is going to be positive, and yellow is going to be the signal. And this green is going to be another negative. So, in order to wire up your Arduino to the arm, you want to get your power supply. And the power supply has kind of a forked prong at the end of it. You'll need to know which one is positive or negative, and you can see the side with the arrow on the plug is the positive side. Little tiny arrow will show which side is positive, and then the other side is negative. Go ahead and plug that into your breadboard. A breadboard works by rows. Each one of these rows is basically a connected wire. So if you plug anything into one of those rows, it's connected to every other dot in that row. So we'll plug this in. It's going to go in sideways so that the two plugs are in two different rows. You can kind of see that there. There we go. Now we have a positive row and a negative row. So we know where our power is. Now we're going to take each one of the servos, and remember yellow and orange are the signal. We're going to plug in a signal wire. And we're going to do that to each one of these servos. Yellow to orange. Orange is the signal. The reason we're wiring up these servos first is because when you stick a servo into this arm, it needs to have kind of defined limits. Like the 180 degrees on the servo needs to correspond with 180 degrees in the joint of the arm. So we want to make sure that the servo isn't in some weird position and then you mount the arm in some weird position, because what can happen then is you try to move the servo someplace and it's out of whack so that the arm clashes with itself and you jam up everything and you can ruin the servos. So what we're going to do is we're going to move all of these servos to their extremes so that mounting the arm is easy. And again, with these jumper wires, blue is negative and white is positive. And on the servo wire itself, red is positive and black or brown is negative. So that's how these colors are working. If you have your own jumper wires, or if your kit is a little bit different, just remember that. This is just a particular case. This is not always true. Blue is not always negative, but in this particular example. We want every mechanism in this arm to go to the same ground. So connect this to one of the ground ports on the Arduino, and then take that and place it over. You can see that is one of the ports along the power bar there. And then take that over and plug it in to the same row as the negative side of your power plug. And we've just created a common ground now. That has to be done, otherwise your servos will have problems knowing where they are. Now we can go ahead and plug all of these servos in. How this is going to work is that the positive and the negative of the servo are going to connect to the positive and negative of the power, basically. That's all there is to it. Hook them straight up. The positive side of the servo connects to the positive bar of power, and the negative side of the servo connects to the negative bar of power. Keep the yellow out to the side for the moment. In a single row, there are probably not enough connections for all of your servos. So what you can do is you can take one of the really short jumper wires and jump across the center bar to extend those horizontal bars so that you have 10 places to plug in the negative as opposed to just 5. There are what jumped me across. A blue wire and a white wire. Again, just a reminder, in this video, the white is positive and the blue is negative on these jumper wires. Now all of these signal wires are going to be connected to the Arduino. We're looking at pins 6, 9, 10, and 11. Those are what the servos are going to be connected to. 6 is the gripper. The gripper is kind of its separate deal when connected to the Arduino, because sometimes the arm doesn't need the gripper if you use one of the rigid grippers that doesn't need the servo. Now our base servo is connected to pin 9. So that's a little bit of a jump, but the gripper is set off again by itself so that we know that it's separate and easy to pull out in case you ever change out grippers to something that doesn't need the servo. And then going on from there, you go from the base at pin 9 to the shoulder to the elbow. So the gripper is in pin 6, the base is in pin 9, shoulder in pin 10, and elbow in pin 11. There's the common ground, and then all of the positive and negatives of the servos hooked up to the positive and negative of the power. Now what we're going to do is we're going to download the latest software for the Arduino and get that uploaded to it, as well as the Python GUI. And there'll be another video that explains how to do both of those, but for now we're just going to assume you have them installed because we're worried about the position of the servos. So go ahead and pop on the shoulder and then use the GUI to move the servo from side to side. And once you do that, you find the two extremes. Try to get it so that when the servo is at a position halfway of how far it can move, that the shoulder is at a position halfway where it can move. And you can kind of test it around and just to see where it goes. You just don't want the arm facing backwards when it's on there, when the servo is moving around. Once you've found the position that you like, you can go ahead and screw on the shoulder to that servo by getting one of the small horn screws and screwing it right in. And there's a hole in the center of the shoulder that lets you do that. Test it one more time, make sure it's in the position that you like. Play around with it a little bit. Now we know our shoulder is aligned in an area where it makes sense. Alright, now get your next servo, the shoulder servo, and maybe put a horn on it so you can see how it moves. You don't have to do this. I'm doing it for the video for effect. But move the servo back and forth. So that position right there is basically all the way down. You can imagine the horn basically as the upper arm of the arm. So when the servo comes up, it lifts the arm, coming down, lowers the arm right there. So move it down to its lowest position, and if it's making a buzzing, kind of back it off a little bit because you don't want it at the position because the servo can't reach that extreme without causing a big old jitter. Then just take your upper arm, pop it into the shoulder there, make sure it's aligned with the side of the servo hole, and then just press the servo right in and into the horn. This is a little bit tough, you'll have to play with it a little bit. Right now the servo is positioned at its lowest position. Line up the upper arm so that it is at its lowest position, and then we know that everything's kind of synchronized. That's as complicated as the calibrating gets. So you move the servo to an extreme, and then when you mount the arm, you make sure that piece of the arm is located at that extreme. So in this case, the servo is all the way down, so the upper arm is mounted all the way down. Squeeze the servo in all the way, Make sure it's snug, because the servo and the shoulder pressing together is what keeps it the servo into the horn, because we can't put a screw into the horn. And go now do one more test on it here to see how the motion is, and you'll see now we can control the shoulder the way we want it, and it's got a full range of motion. It can go almost straight up and then all the way down. Then you basically do the exact same thing with the elbow. Kind of line it up parallel to where it will fit into the elbow, and then put a horn on it again so you can kind of see how it moves. And then move the servo to its extremes using the GUI on the computer. Now go ahead, the same thing with the elbow. Get it lined up so it's kind of parallel with the elbow so you can see how it all moves. Almost as if it's in the exact same position as where it will be when it's mounted. Then whenever you want to really kind of manhandle the arm, make sure you unplug it. And this turns off the servos, otherwise the servos try to hold a position. When you're ready to move the servo, plug it in, and then move the servo to its two extremes. And when you found out where that is, unplug it again, put the elbow onto the upper arm, and then just plug the servo into where it belongs. It'll take a little bit of jiggling, and make sure that that servo, when it is at its extreme, that again you mount the elbow at that extreme. Once you're done mounting the servo, go ahead and plug it all in and test it out, and your arm should move something like this. If for some reason your arm doesn't move, then at the elbow, or something gets jammed, then just move the servo to the opposite extreme and remount it in the exact same position, because it means you got something backwards, and instead of expanding the arm, it's trying to curl the arm up even more from its closed position, basically. And just do a quick test, go through everything, and that should be good. Now we're going to do the same thing with the gripper. Go ahead and place the horn on there so you can kind of see how it moves. Make sure it's placed away from the elbow so that if, in case you got something backwards, it doesn't clash with the elbow and screw everything up. Go ahead and plug the arm in and move the horn through its positions. At the 0 position is where the gripper should be open, and then you can bring it forward a ways, and that's where the gripper should be closed. And actually, so you have kind of more stroke in the motion, make sure that at the 0 position the horn is actually pointed just a little bit backwards, kind of off-center backwards, because that means it has a very long distance to go moving forward. Go ahead and mount that horn on permanently by putting in one of the horn mounting screws. Then you'll find that wire, then bring it all the way back and open the gripper as far as you can, as far as it'll go. And you'll put in that wire that is for the gripper, put it into the gripper, and then put it into the second hole in that horn. That hole is a little bit bigger, so it's a little bit easier to notice, but it's the second hole from the outside. But if you ever want to adjust anything, you can put the wire into the other ones too. It's just not real necessary. It shouldn't be necessary. Then go ahead and take your pliers and bend that wire over so it can't pop out of the servo or the gripper. And go ahead and test it. And now you have a working gripper. And if you wanted to grip more tightly, go ahead and make the wire a little bit longer by taking it out and pulling out a little bit, like 1/8 of an inch, and then putting it back together again, and that will make the gripper grip more tightly, and the wire will actually kind of serve as a spring, taking up the slack and the pressure. So if your servo is way out of whack and it comes flying way far forward, the wire will just bend a little bit to make it work. And now you have your arm all put together and ready to go.